7 things that I wish that I had known before I started writing my first novel or screenplay. Whether you start with character or plot, it doesn't matter. There are numerous successful authors and writers that will prefer one over the other, and they'll explain why. I know that Aaron Sorkin, he likes to start with plot, and most other writers that I've talked to like to start with character. I have found myself gravitating more toward plot and then creating characters that would fit in well with that plot. Now, once I do that, the characters do form their own life, and I invest in those characters and turn them into people that I can rally behind. Number 2, a lot of people try to write 2,500 words a day or 500 words a day. But I learned that if I do that, it could take me 4 or 5 hours because I might stop and have to go do research. And I'm going to share something with you that'll be hard to believe. My 3rd novel, Young Vines, and my 4th novel, The Portrait of Samantha Yale, I wrote those 2 novels in 15-minute increments. I promised myself that I would sit down every day and write for 15 minutes. And sometimes when those 15 minutes were up, I was done. It may be because I had other things to do. It may be because my creative juices weren't flowing that well. However, there are other times when I made my 15-minute minimum. There are times that I went on for 45 minutes or an hour or even longer because I was on a roll. I was inspired. There was a clear path. There were no interruptions. But I'm going to challenge you, and I want you to test me on this. I want you to write 15 minutes a day and see how much progress you've made after a week or 2. I think you'll be very pleased. And that leads us into number 3. Not all writing is sitting down and typing away at your computer, even if that's you writing on a notepad. The time you invest in writing can also be put toward research. It can be put toward watching other films and documentaries, reading other people's memoirs and books and novels. And that's exactly why I refuse to make myself have a 2,500 word a day minimum. If I did that, I might actually cut my research down and not give the story everything that I've got because I was trying to make that word minimum. It's super easy to get on a rabbit hole of research and information, and 4 or 5 hours later, you're like, I learned a lot, but I didn't get any writing done. Number 4, there's no secret sauce, there's no shortcuts. It's going to take time. So if you can keep your mind fresh, that's going to be your asset. And for me, what worked for me was the minimum of 15 minutes a day. If my brain got tired around minute 30 or minute 45, hey, I've made my 15-minute minimum. I can walk away from it. Number 5, just get your first draft down on paper. Just get it down. You can revise later. And while you're revising, you don't have to delete entire paragraphs. You don't have to delete concepts. You don't have to delete anything. Just copy, paste it, put it in a scraps folder because you may need it later. And I hope that encourages you to make revisions because it is not fun to go back and draft 2 and feel like you have to delete 7 or 8 pages that you wrote. Don't do that. Copy, paste it into a scraps folder, get rid of it out of your second draft. That way you don't feel like you've wasted all that time writing it. Number 6, once you've created the plot and you've created the characters, allow the characters to run free. Don't feel like you have to control them. There have been numerous times where maybe 75% into the story, I had one of my characters was supposed to behave a certain way, and I realized the character just wouldn't do that. And there have been times I had to get other people to read it, help me understand what I need that character to do to provide resolution and to satisfy the audience, but to stay true to who that character is. So in my novel, The Mason Jar, I wrote a screenplay for The Mason Jar. By the time you're watching this, years may have passed. It might be called The Mason Jar. It might be called My Home's in Alabama, or it's going to be part of the Pepperdine series. Right now, we're planning out the filming, but it's going to take a long time. But the novel version is The Mason Jar. At the end of that story, I have a character named Katie approach a character named Eden. And originally, even though years had passed, she's still very vicious. But around 2015, I actually had a readers group read the screenplay at a public library in Gunnersville, Alabama. It was a book club. And out of the 15 to 20 people that read that screenplay, and we read it out loud, I had one person pull me aside and say, after all of that time, I don't think Katie would still be vicious. I think that she would be remorseful. I think that she would be humble. I think that she would have come to better senses instead of the person she was in college 7 years ago. And the woman that pulled me aside and told me that, she was right. That also gave me the character arc that I needed. And sometimes feedback can be so obvious, you're mad at yourself and you just chastise yourself and you say, why didn't I think of that? Well, that's why you have a test audience. That's why you have editors. Think of your favorite writer, your favorite author. They didn't write that book. They didn't write that screenplay by themselves. They had help. And number 7, you can skip around. You don't have to write chapter 1 and then chapter 2 and then chapter 3. If you've created a brief outline, you can write portions of chapter 7 way before you write portions of chapter 3. If you feel super inspired to just go ahead and crank out that scene in chapter 7 or crank out that scene when you're 80% into the screenplay, it's okay. And this is something I tell my students all the time. There's no right way to do this. Your job at the end of the day is to keep your audience's attention by delivering a good story. There's no wrong method to do that.